and welcome back to another episode of Becoming No One. I'm your host, Big Taj, and today we're going to talk about Stanza 2. I'm back, friends. Sorry, last week I had to take a little intermission just because we're halfway through the season, and I just wanted to get organized because me and my brother are going to Spain, and I had to catch up on some episodes, so I appreciate y'all. I love y'all deep. And I really thought that we would be able to start Stanza 3 in this episode, but I really took my time and went into deep detail because I remember the book advised that the second stanza would kind of be hard for us to differentiate from the first. So it's going to require some intuition here. I'll try to interpret it the best that I can from my level of consciousness, but it would benefit everybody to try to use your own discernment based off of what we learned so far. And then next week we'll start Stanza 3, which will probably be about a 2-part episode. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and jump into Stanza 1, Section 1, and we'll go from there. So Stanza 2, Section 1 says, "Where were the builders, the luminous sons of the man-inventeric dawn, and the unknown darkness in their ahi," meaning the Kohanic and the Dhyani Buddhic, Parinishpana, the producers of form, Rupa, from no form, Arupa, the root of the world, the Devamatari, and the Svadhatvat, rest in the bliss of non-being. So the secret doctrine breaks this down into 2 parts. The first part is part A, and it says, "The builders, the son of the man-inventeric dawn, are the real creators of the universe." And in this doctrine, which deals only with our planetary system, they, as the architects of the latter, are also called the watchers of the 7 spheres, which exoterically are the 7 planets, and esoterically the 7 earths or spheres of our chain also. The open sentence of stanza 1, when mentioning 7 eternities, is made to apply both to the Mahakalpa, or the Great Age of Brahma, as well as the solar prela and subsequent resurrection of our planetary system on the higher plane. There are many kinds of pralaya, which is just the dissolution of things from the visible, as we will show elsewhere. So part A is just pointing out that there are beings usually referred to as the planetary spirits, or the builders, who are responsible for the creation of our planets and universe. They're also responsible for organizing things and putting things into form. And these builders come from a class called the cosmocrators. And they are invisible but intelligent beings, and they put things together based on the divine and cosmic ideation. Now, the cosmic ideation is just the consciousness that we're meant to explore. So they're considered to be the gods and the rulers of Earth, and typically rule planets and cosmic matter, opposed to individual spiritual beings, if that makes sense. So in our solar system, they are also referred to as the watchers, and they rule over the 7 spheres. This to me means that there are 7 different consciousness levels that Earth has to go through in its evolutionary chain. And right now we're just now entering this 4th round as of 2012, but these beings have a hierarchy between them, and based on which level of consciousness we're at, that'll tell us which being is basically putting together and forming everything in that density of consciousness. But in addition to there being multiple planetary spirits based on the level of consciousness of Earth, they also have a hierarchy structure in between planets. So they're going to vary based on planets as well. For example, Jupiter would have a higher ranking planetary spirit than Earth because the planetary builder has to act and reflect the universal consciousness or plan made for that planet. So remember, we talked about how planets have different variables to explore. Well, Earth is at the lowest vibration, so our planetary spirit must align with that. And this text refers to them as well as the sons of the man-inventeric dawn. And they not only rule the physical manifestation of Earth in its evolutionary cycles, but it also rules the spiritual versions as well. Now, part B says Parinishpana, which is the absolute, hence the same as parinirvana. Besides being the final state, it is that condition of subjectivity which has no relation to anything but the absolute truth, which we call paramartha satya on its plane. So it is that state which leads one to appreciate correctly the full meaning of non-being, which, as explained, is absolute being. Sooner or later, all the now seemingly exist will be in the reality and actually in the state of parinishpana. But there is a great difference between consciousness and unconscious beings. So the condition of parinishpana without paramartha, the self-analyzing consciousness, is no bliss, but simply existence for 7 eternities. Thus, an iron ball placed under the scorching ray of the sun will get heated through, but will not feel or appreciate the warmth, while a man will. It is only with the mind clear and undarkened by personality and an assimilation of the merit of manifold existences devoted to being in its collectivity, the whole living and sentient universe, that one gets rid of personal existence, merging into becoming one with the absolute and continuing in the full possession of Paramartha. Now, basically what this means is it's referring to the state of parinirvana, which again is when you release your lower ego or personality to live in this state of balance, okay, free from greed, hatred, and self-focus. And how this state of being gives you an appreciation for non-being or returning to the all is when you are in this state of parinirvana, you are not plagued with the pain and suffering that we experience on this material plane, okay? So this state of absolute truth without our self-analyzing consciousness doesn't bring us bliss, because we don't get to appreciate being conscious and feeling. And feelings help us to understand our experience and appreciate it on a new level. So this is saying that man can feel. So it's our goal to reach this state of releasing the lower ego while still having access to our feelings so that we can appreciate our reality. Okay, so part 1 of stanza 2 tells us that this was the state that the universe was in on day 2, where you're still in the state of non-being because it didn't have like a personality or an ego. Like we didn't have that greed, hatred, self-focus. So we didn't have that. You're still in the state of non-being. However, it's almost as if the universe was in meditation. It was still an observation, okay? So my interpretation is that it was almost as if the universe was meditating. It is conscious and unconscious at the same time, observing, feeling, but not reacting, still in a state of balance, but very aware. So stanza 2, part 2 says, "Where was silence? Where were the ears to sense it? No, there was neither silence nor sound, not save ceaseless, eternal breath, which is motion, which knows itself not." Now, part A from The Secret Doctrine says, "The idea that things can cease to exist and still be is a fundamental one in Eastern psychology. Under this apparent contradiction in terms, there rests a fact of nature to realize which in the mind, rather than argue about words, is the important thing. A familiar instance of a similar paradox is afforded by chemical combination. The question whether hydrogen and oxygen cease to exist when found again when the water is decomposed, they must be there all the while. Other contending that as they actually turn into something totally different, they must cease to exist as themselves for the time being. But neither side is able to form the faintest conception of the real condition of the thing, which is more real than their existence as gases. And it may faintly symbolize the condition of the universe when it goes to sleep or cease to be during the nights of Brahma, to awaken or reappear again when the dawn of the new Manavantara recalls it to what we call existence." So basically what this is saying is that on the second day, the universe was in this state of non-being and being at the same time, which is hard to explain. But this girl on TikTok used an analogy, y'all, that I thought made so much sense. So what she was saying is like, everything, the universe is like baking a cake. You need eggs, water, oil, frosting, sugar, right? And when you combine those things together, it's not that those things no longer exist, but they are just at a different form. So if you cut a slice of cake, you still have egg, water, oil, frosting, and sugar all in that one place. They're all still maintaining their individuality, even though they're in a different form. Basically, it's just saying that this state of non-being still exists while we're in the state of being, okay? Because the state of non-being is absolute, it's perfection, it's what we're always going to go back to, but we're made of that. We're made out of that, so it still exists, okay? So part B says, "The breath of the one existence is used in its application only to the spiritual aspect of cosmogony by archaic esotericism. Otherwise, it is replaced by its equivalent in the material plane, which is motion. So the one eternal element or element containing vehicle is space, because space is dimensionless in every sense and is coexistent with which we are. Endless duration, primordial, hence indestructible matter, and motion. So absolute perpetual motion, which is the breath of the one element. This breath, as seen, can never cease, not even during the pralaic eternities. But the breath of the one existence does not all the same apply to the one causeless cause, or the all beingness, in contradistinction to all being, which is Brahma or the universe. Now, Brahma or Hari, the four-faced God, who, after lifting the earth out of the waters, accomplished the creation, is held to be only the instrumental, and not, as clearly implied, the ideal cause. No Orientalist so far seems to have thoroughly comprehended the real sense of the verse in the Purana, treat of creation. Therein, Brahma is the cause of the potencies that are to be generated subsequently for the work of creation. When a translator says, and from him proceeds the potencies to be created after they had become the real cause, and from it proceeds the potencies that will create as they become the real cause on the material plane, would perhaps be more correct. Save that one. Causeless, ideal cause, there is no other to which the universe can be referred. It's the worthiest of aesthetics through its potency. Okay, so an example is through the potencies of that cause, every created thing comes by its inherent or proper nature. If in the Vedanta and Nyaya, Nimitta is the efficient cause as contrasted with Apadana, the material cause. Okay, so Pradhana implies the function of both. So in the esoteric philosophy, which reconciles all these systems and the nearest component of which is the Vedanta, as expounded by the Advaita Vedantist, none but the Upadana can be speculated upon, that which is in the mind of the Vaishnavas as the ideal in contradistinction to the real, or the Parabrahma in Ishvara, can find no room in the published speculation, since the ideal, even in the misnomer, which applies that to that of which no human reason, even that of an adept, can conceive. And don't worry, I'm going to explain this all in just a second, okay? So to know itself to oneself necessitates consciousness and perception, both limited faculties in relation to any subject except Parabrahma, to be cognized. Hence, the eternal breath which knows itself not, infinity cannot comprehend finiteness. The boundless can have no relationship to the bounded and the conditions. In the occult teachings, the unknown and the unknowable mover, or the self-existing, is the absolute divine essence, and thus being absolute consciousness and absolute motion. To the limited sense of those who describe this indescribable, it is unconsciousness and immovableness. Concrete consciousness cannot be predicated on abstract consciousness any more than the quality wet can be predicated on water. Wetness being its own attribute and the cause of the wet quality in other things. Now, consciousness implies limitations and qualifications, something to be conscious of and someone to be conscious of it. But absolute consciousness contains the cognizer, the thing cognized, and the cognition, all three in itself and all three one. So no man is conscious of more than that portion of his knowledge that happens to have been recalled to his mind at any particular time. Yet such is the poverty of language that we have no term to distinguish the knowable, not actively thought of, from knowledge we are unable to recall as a memory. So to forget is synonymous with not to remember. How much greater must be the difficulty of finding terms to describe and to distinguish between abstract metaphysical facts or differences. It must not be forgotten also that we given names to things according to the appearance they assume for ourselves. We call absolute consciousness unconsciousness because it seems to us that it is or must necessarily be so, just as we call the absolute darkness, because to our finite understanding it appears quite impenetrable, yet we recognize fully that our perception of such things does not do them justice. We involuntarily distinguish in our minds, for instance, between unconscious absolute consciousness and unconsciousness by secretly endowing the former with some indefinite quality that corresponds on a higher plane than our thoughts can reach with what we know as consciousness in ourselves. But this is not any kind of consciousness that we can manage to distinguish from what appears to us as unconsciousness. So this part is just explaining what we've talked about 1,000 times before. It's hard for us to understand this state of non-being because we are finite and we can't understand infinite things. However, what the universe would consider to be the great breath is equivalent to motion in the material plane. It's in everything that exists on this physical plane. In fact, you are not living or being if you are not in this state of motion, okay? So if you do not hold a frequency or vibration, if you're not creating a sound, because vibrations create sound frequencies, right? So it is saying that there is no vibration in this state of non-being, but on the cosmic level, like motion in the physical plane, this great breath is everywhere and everything all at once. Although the two are not related because everything in the physical plane has limitations, restrictions, and bounds, which doesn't exist in this state of non-being, they are both in everything everywhere all at once, okay? So the great breath on this cosmic level and motion on the material level, they're in everything. So the limitations that we experience on this plane make it hard for us to name what we don't understand, because we can only think from our level of awareness. So when the previous part was explaining that the universe had consciousness, it's not to be compared to our understanding of consciousness, because our understanding has limitations because we're finite beings. But it is in this state of absolute consciousness, which is unknowable, which we can't conceive, and is unmovable, meaning there is no vibration. Part one is just basically telling us that the universe is in this state of being and non-being at the same time, where it's not able to feel as if man can feel, but it's still in kind of like this meditative state where it's aware and conscious, but it's also unconscious at the same time. Whereas the second part is telling us that, again, we have a hard time perceiving what we cannot understand. So the only way to look at this great breath of life, right, is to compare it to motion in this material plane. Okay, and if something is in this material plane, anything that exists in this material plane has motion, but it has its causes in a spiritual plane outside of this material plane. It also wants us to understand that darkness is not darkness, is the absolute truth. And everything that is being right now is going to go back into this darkness, or what we consider to be darkness. But our understanding of darkness and consciousness is just different. But in this space, because space is the only actual vehicle for this consciousness, we cannot conceive what it is. It's unknowable to us, but we also need to understand it's unmovable, meaning there is no vibration, because vibration or motion is specific to this material plane, not the cosmos. Now, stanza 2, part 3 says, the hour has not yet struck, the ray had not yet flashed into the germ, the Matri Padma, or Mother Lotus, had not yet swollen. Now, part A of the secret doctrine says, the ray of the ever darkness becomes, as it is emitted, a ray of effulgent light or life, and flashes into the germ. The point in the mundane egg represented by the matter in its abstract sense, but the term point must not be understood as applying to any particular point in space, for a germ exists in the center of every atom, and these collectively form the germ, or rather, as no atom can be made visible to our physical eye, the collectivity of these. So if the term can be applied, something which is boundless or infinite forms the noumenon of eternal and indestructible matter. So basically what this is saying is that the ray is an angle of light that flashes from the unmanifested logos, which is darkness. Logos, again, is just that love energy that we talked about. Remember when we talked about the higher self episode, we talked about how light is the physical manifestation of love, or the logos energy. So it is the creative agency, and only becomes active after the pralaya, or 7 eternities of non-being, to start the manifestation process. Now, this had not yet happened on day 2 or during this phase of stanza 2 in the evolutionary process. The ray causes the water and the primordial matter to be differentiated from one another like a baby in its mother's womb. That had not happened yet, because it says the mother lotus had not yet been swollen. So nothing is manifested yet in this second stage. Now, part B says, one of the symbolical figures for the dual creative power of nature, matter and force on the material plane, is Padma, the water lily of India. Now, the lotus is the product of heat, fire, and water, vapor, ether. Fire standing in every philosophical and religious system as a representation of the spirit of deity, the active male generative principle, and ether, or the soul of matter, the light of the fire, for the passive female principle from which everything in the universe emanates. Now, hence, ether or water is the mother and fire is the father. Okay, that was from Sir W. Jones. And before him, archaic botany showed that the seed of the lotus contained, even before they germinated, a perfectly formed leaves, the miniature space of what one day, as perfect plants, they will become. So nature, thus giving us a specimen of the performation of its production. The seed of all plants bearing lotus flowers as a universal signal. So this explains the sentence, the mother had not yet swollen, the form being usually sacrificed to the inner or root idea of archaic symbology. Now, the lotus, or the Padma, is moreover a very ancient and favorite simile for cosmos itself and also for men. So the popular reasons given are, firstly, the fact that we just mentioned that the lotus seed contains within itself a perfect miniature version of it, the future plant, which typifies the fact that the spiritual prototypes of all things exist in the immaterial world before those things become materialized on earth. Secondly, the fact that the lotus plant grows up through the water, having its roots in the mud and spreading its flowers above in the air. The lotus thus typifies the life of man, and also that of the cosmos. For the secret doctrine teaches that the elements of both are the same and that both are developing in the same direction. So the roots of the lotus sink into the mud represents the material life, and the stalk passing through the water typifies existence in the astral world, and then the flower floating on the water and opening up to the sky represents us being spiritual beings, because we're the connection between those two things. So let me explain it a little bit further. So the second part just points out the symbolism of it all using a commonly used symbol, which is the lotus. If you're amongst any spiritual people, you're going to see a lotus somewhere, whether it's on their tarot deck, whether it's tattooed on their body. Like, a lotus is going to be somewhere amongst the people, okay? And lotuses are a product of heat, fire, and water vapor, or aether. Heat represents the masculine component coming together with the water, the feminine component, which is the aether or water vapor that surrounds us, to start the germination process, which is the creative process of the water lily that already contains itself, or what it is destined to become, inside the germ before it even starts to grow, okay, which is representative of the spiritual world, and also us having everything that we need inside of ourselves before we even get here, okay? So not only that, when it does start to grow, its roots dig deep into the mud underneath the water, while the stalk sprouts out of the water, which is symbolic of everything that we have in this material world, right? The roots are us in this material world as physical beings, and then the stalk is supposed to represent us, penetrating through to the astral world, and then the water lily sitting on top of the water is us. We're the medium between the two. So we understand that both matter and spirit are connected through us, the water lily. So stanza 2, part 4 says, her heart had not yet opened for the one ray to enter, hence to fall as 3 into 4 in the lap of Maya. Now, first understand that in the physical matter, in the physical plane, the number 3 is seen as masculine and 4 as feminine. Okay, so A of the secret doctrine says the primordial substance had not yet passed out of its pre-cosmic latency into differentiated objectivity, or become the invisible protile of science, but as the hour strikes and it becomes receptive of the photic impression of the divine thought, which is the logos, or the male aspect of the mina mundi, which is again the soul, it hearts opens. So it differentiates, and the 3, father, mother, son, are transformed into 4. Herein lies the origin of double mystery of the Trinity and the Immaculate Conception. So the first and fundamental dogma of occultism is universal unity, or homogeneity, under 3 aspects. So this led to a possible conception of deity, which as an absolute unity must remain forever incomprehensible to finite intellects. If thou would have believed in the power which acts within the roots of a plant, or imagined the root concealed under the soul, thou hast to think of its stalk or trunk, and of its leaves and flower. Thou canst not imagine that power independently of these objects. Life can be known only by the tree of life. The idea of absolute unity would be broken entirely in our conception had we not something concrete before our eyes to contain that unity. And the deity, being absolute, must be omnipresent, hence not an atom, but contains it within itself. The roots, the trunk, and its many branches are 3 different objects, yet they are one tree. Says the Kabbalist, the deity is one because it is infinite. It is triple because it is ever manifesting. So this manifestation is triple in its aspect, which I just want to stop real quick and say, anytime you see the number 3, you need to think create. This is why 3 is representative of creative energy. So this manifestation is triple in its aspects, for it requires, as Aristotle has it, 3 principles for every natural body to become objective: privation, form, and matter. Now, privation meant in the mind of the great philosopher that which the occultist calls the prototype impressed in the astral light, the lowest plane in the world of Amina Mundi, which is your soul. So the union of these 3 principles depends upon a 4th, the life which radiates from the summits of the unreachable to become an universally diffused essence on the manifested plane of existence. And this quaternary, father, mother, son, as a unity, and a quaternary as a living manifestation, has been the means of leading to the very archaic idea of Immaculate Conception, now finally crystallized into a dogma of the Christian Church, which carnalized this metaphysical idea beyond any common sense. For one has but to read the Kabbalah and study its numerical methods of interpretation to find the origin of that dogma. It is purely astronomical, mathematical, and preemptively metaphysical. So the male element in nature, personified by the male deity or the Logi, or Brahma, Horus, Osiris, is born through not from an immaculate source personified by the mother, because the male having a mother cannot have a father. So the abstract deity being sexless and not even a being, but beingness or life itself. Let us render this in the mathematical language of the author of the source of measure, speaking of the measure of man and his numerical Kabbalic value. He writes that in Genesis chapter 4, volume 1, it is called the man, even Jehovah measures, and this is obtained in this way. 113 times 5 equals 565, and the value of 565 can be placed under the form of expression 56.5 times 10 equals 565. Now, keep in mind, this measure comes from the measure of men, okay? So it's using Kabbalistic, like, number measurements, okay? So man is represented by the number 113, which becomes a factor of 56.5 times 10. And the Kabbalistic reading of this last numbered expression is called Jod He Va He, or Jehovah. So the expansion of the 565 into 56.5 times 10 is the proposed emanation of the male Jod from the female Eva principle, or Hava. So to speak, the birth of the male element from an immaculate source, in other words, an immaculate conception. Thus is repeated on earth the mystery enacted according to the seers on the divine plane. So the son of the immaculate celestial virgin, or the undifferentiated cosmoprotile matter in its infinitude, is born again on earth as the son of the terrestrial Eve, our mother earth, and becomes humanity as a total, past, present, and future. For Jehovah, or Jod He Va He, is androgynous, or both male and female. Above, the sun is the whole cosmos. Below, he is mankind. So the triad or triangle becomes the tetractys, the sacred Pythagorean number, the perfect square, and the six-faced cube on earth. So the macro prospis, the great face, is now micro prospis, the lesser face, or as the Kabbalists have it, the ancient of days, descending on Adam Kadmon, whom he uses as his vehicle to manifest through, gets transformed into tetragrammaton. It is now in the lap of Maya, the great illusion in between itself and reality, has the astral light, great deceiver of man's limited senses, unless knowledge from Paramarth Satya comes to the rescue. So Taja, what does this tell us? This is just explaining that the heart had not yet opened and there was no separation between the male and female principle. They were still one with each other in the three aspects. Like a tree, its roots and its branches are visibly three separate things, but are part of one tree. So each holds its separate power, which makes the full creation. Then it goes on to explain where the idea of Adam and Eve came from, which was the numerical equation that represented the measure of man. So man numerically is 113. But you have to multiply it by its parts, which are the Father, the divine thought, mother, nature, son, body, vehicle, unity, right? And then the living manifestation. So 113 times 5 equals 565, which becomes 56.5 times 10 when you separate them out, okay? So when you differentiate the male principle from the female principle. So this numerical expression broken into parts is Jod He Va He, or Jehovah. Jah is the male principle, and Hova, which translates to Hava or Eve, is the female principle. So Genesis chapter 4 verse 26 says, "Then began man to call upon the name of the Lord." Lord replaces Yahweh, which is translated in Hebrew as Jehovah, over 6,000 times in the Bible's translations, okay? But it's mistranslated and it shouldn't have been. So then began men to call themselves by the name of Jehovah, which was just explaining that there was a separation of sexes at this level. Adam is the vehicle or masculine principle of our physical being, and Eve or Hava is the earth nature, the feminine principle of our physical being. It's an allegory explaining that when the ray or angle of light is radiated towards the vehicle, it is androgynous, or Jehovah, meaning there is no sex. But when the body, Adam, is born to earth, Eve, then we see a separation of sexes. So if we are to apply as above, so below, which is called the principle of correspondence, the son or creation from the masculine principle, directing its will towards the female principle to start the creation process. The above result is the cosmos, or the creation of the universe. The below result is the creation of man. So this happens across both. Okay, so man is born into the lap of Maya, or illusion, and only through knowledge can the truth be revealed to them, because man is basically sitting in between these two worlds, a false reality and actual reality. And the only way for us to understand what part is real is for us to get universal truth and universal knowledge. So when it says her heart was not yet open yet, to me it means Earth's heart was not open to receive the ray of light. Once Earth heart opens, then the 3, or masculine principle, will fall into the 4, feminine principle, meaning that the separation will happen and fall into the lap of Maya. So it's talking about the fall in consciousness into the realm of the plane of illusions, which is the material plane, which is Earth. I did not mean for this to be a math lesson, but the reason why I'm giving y'all the numerical representations, because it explains where they get Jehovah from, and we can understand on a deeper level where the Christian dogma comes from, because again, when this was put together, this was so long ago. Think about how technologically and intellectually advanced we have been since the Bible was created, since it started being put on the market, right? And we have people back then trying to interpret this information, and it's hard for us to understand now in today's time. Imagine how hard it was for them to understand when they don't have nearly as much information as we have now. Okay, so it's really important for us to go back and see where this came from, why they did it the way that they did. Because if you think about it, I mean, the male principle, the female principle, they were trying to put it in stories and allegories to try to teach us the information, but somebody took it literally. Somebody didn't fully understand these sacred teachings because they didn't have a teacher or an adept to walk them through it. So they just did it based off of their consciousness level and what they could actually perceive. And if we don't have a cause of something in our reality, we draw a blank. So they just created the causes. So it's our job to go back and look at this stuff ourselves and unpack it. Now, stanza 2, part 5 says, the 7 sons were not born from the web of light. Darkness alone was mother, father. Sfat-Hadvat and Sfat-Hadvat was darkness. I'll explain that in just a second. This part is a little hard to interpret what she wrote in the book, so just bear with me because these words are about to chew me up, okay? So part A says, the secret doctrine in the stanzas given here occupies itself chiefs, if not entirely with our solar system, and especially with our planetary chain. The 7 sons, therefore, are the creators of the latter. This teaching will be explained more fully hereafter. Now, Sfat-Hadvat, the plastic essence that fills the universe, is the root of all things. And it is the Buddhistic concrete aspect of the abstraction called in the Hindu philosophy Mula Prakriti. It is the body of the soul, and that which ether would be to Akasa. The latter being the informing principle of the former, Chinese mystics have made of it the synonym of being. In the Ekasalka Shastra of Nagarjuna, or the Long Shi of China, called the Chinese the Yi Shu Lu Kia Lun, it is said that the original word of Yu is being, or Sabhava, and the substance giving substance to itself, also explained by him as meaning without action or with action, the nature which has no nature of its own, Sabhava, from which Sabhavat is composed of 2 words, Su, fair, handsome, good, Sava, self, and Bahava, being or state of being. Now, to me, that seems like 3 words, but anyways, so the Sabhavat is the infinite and eternal substance that produces all, while everything which is of its essence produces itself out of its own nature. So it's made up of 3 words, Su, which is good, perfect, fair, handsome, Sav, which is self, and Bahava, being or state of being. It is referring to the universal spirit, the universal consciousness, and this is just saying that everything was still one and the universal consciousness or spirit was in darkness, okay? Now, stanza 2, part 6 says, these 2 are the germ, and the germ is 1. The universe was still concealed in the divine thought and the divine bosom. Okay, so it says the divine thought does not imply the idea of divine thinker. The universe, not only past, present, and future, which is a human and finite idea expressed by the finite thought, but in its totality, the Sat, an untranslated term, the absolute being with the past and future crystallized in the eternal present, is that thought itself reflected in a secondary or manifest cause. So Brahma, as the mysterium magnum of Paracelsus, is an absolute mystery to the human mind. Brahma, the male-female, its aspect of anthropomorphic reflection is conceivable to the perceptions of blind faith, though rejected by human intellect when it attains its majority. Hence, the statement that during the prologue, so to say, of the drama of creation or the beginning of cosmic evolution, the universe or the sun lies still concealed in the divine thought, which has not yet penetrated into the divine bosom. The idea, note well, is at the root and forms the origin of all allegories about the Son of God born of Immaculate Virgin. Now, this basically says that there's the idea of Virgin Mary comes from this section of the stanza because they keep saying that the feminine aspect was still whole like a virgin before being split off or differentiated from the male principle. So the masculine principle had not yet sent the ray of light to start the creation process at this stage. So the feminine principle had not yet ignited yet. Hence why they say the feminine principle was still a virgin. So the universe or whatever is being created was in this state of absolute being still, right? In the state of being and non-being at the same time. So there was no past or no future. Everything was in this now moment. So the cause is starting to happen here, right? That are going to lead to the effects. And to me, it feels like this is equivalent to when you're meditating and you haven't yet come up with a clear and organized thought pattern. So you're still thinking before acting, you're conscious and processing, but still deep in this meditative state. Like it's kind of like you're observing your thoughts as they come. And the seeds are being planted, but they have not yet sprouted. So the germ is still one. It's being watered, but has not yet produced anything. So that's stanza 2, y'all. So I feel like the difference between stanza 1 and stanza 2 is that in stanza 2, the universe is kind of in this meditative state where it's able to observe its thoughts, but it does not have any emotions or personality that go along with that thought, okay? So it's kind of in this state of being and non-being at the same time where there is no sound, right? There is no motion. It's unmovable. It's also unknowable. The masculine and feminine principle had not separated yet, but here's where we first start talking about us being 5 parts of one being, right? We have the astral ray, right? We have the body, we have the soul, right? We have the unity, and we have the living manifestation, right? So we are kind of these conduits in between the physical and the spiritual world, or what we would consider to be reality and a false reality. And the only way for us to get out of this lap of illusion, right, and at this lower consciousness level is for us to learn the truth, right? So it's our job to get knowledge and wisdom because that's going to help us lift the veil and also get access to our spiritual components as well so that we're able to see through this illusion that we experience in this material plane. And through understanding those 5 parts, we can apply the numerical value using the Kabbalah, right? Using the Kabbalist techniques, which give us the number values of certain words. And it just so happened that the 5 components of us added together is Jehovah. So Jehovah is supposed to represent us being an absolute. Before the separation happens, we're still whole. We're still in this state of perfection, although creation is about to start. The germ is about to be planted. Now, I think the differentiation is important because that means that we have 5 aspects. That means that we're not just a physical being. We need to learn about the other aspects in order for us to really understand who we are and get out of this state of illusion so that we can know how we function, how we operate, what we have access to, what we can do, and rise up out of this lower level of consciousness, which is the goal, because our whole purpose of being here is to grow and to evolve and to learn. But it also helps us to understand this universal law of us having everything that we need inside of us before we even get here, right? Because they talked about the symbology of the lotus and what it means in the spiritual community, right? The lotus as a seed has literally a copy and paste of exactly what it's going to look like once it's planted and it grows, and its roots go downward and its plant goes upwards and its stalk is up in the air, right? Which represents those 3 components of us, the physical component, the astral component, and then us being the living manifestation that is living between these 2 realities, false and actual reality. So that's the end of stanza 2. I hope that I was able to break this down in a digestible way. Next week, again, we're going to start with stanza 3, which will probably be a 2-part episode because it really is long. Actually, it might be a 3-part episode. I'm still working on the second half, so I have to see how long it is because there's about 12 parts to stanza 3. Okay, so that's coming. I hope y'all love this episode. It really brought some stuff full circle for me and just helped me to understand where things come from. And I love when we have the cause of something, we're able to conceive it, whereas when we don't, we're not able to conceive it. So it really helped to bring some clarity for me. So thank y'all for always coming to learn with me. Thank y'all for tapping in. I love y'all deep. I'll see y'all next week, and happy healing, friends. As far as resources, I'm sorry I meant to I forgot to mention this. As far as resources, is The Secret Doctrine by Helena P. Blavatsky, Theosophy Wiki, and the Book of Dizon. All right, y'all. See y'all next week.